Good afternoon. My name is Susanne Oberhauser, and on behalf of the European Parliament office in London, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's event on child refugees then and now to mark today's International Holocaust Memorial Day. As the President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, said earlier today at a ceremony held in Brussels, Holocaust Remembrance Day is not just an anniversary. Above all, it is an invitation to show our commitment, vigilance, and responsibility. And one of those most important responsibilities shared by the EU and the UK is the protection of our joint humanitarian values, and amongst them, the way we deal with and we treat child refugees. We have with us today somebody who embodies this more than anybody else. Alf Dubs, member of the House of Lords, who arrived in Britain in 1939 as a 6-year-old boy in a Kindertransport and became one of the most tireless campaigners for the rights of child refugees and unaccompanied minors. From the European Parliament, we have Brando Benifei, an Italian member from the Democratic Party. He has been very active in decrying the humanitarian crisis in the refugee camps in Lesbos and Lipa, and will be able to talk to us about the EU's migration policy and the need for action. Both are joined by acclaimed theatre director Stephen Daldry, on whose commitment for improving the situation of refugees you will hear more in a moment. Hosting our conversation will be Frances Donner Saunders, a writer and broadcaster. Her London Review of Books Winter Lecture in 2016, Where on Earth Are You?, explored the meaning and impact of borders to our lives with specific reference to the refugee crisis. She recently curated an exhibition, What Would You Take?, which addressed the agonizing choices facing people on the threshold of displacement. Her forthcoming book, The Suitcase, 6 Attempts to Cross a Border, is an exploration of history, geography, and memory, mapped on the story of her father's experiences as losing his childhood home and becoming a refugee in World War II. I wish us all a very stimulating and interesting discussion with this very wonderful panel, and I hand over to Frances. Thank you very much.
Dan, thank you very much, and thank you everybody who's attending this event. I'm very honored to be part of it. Such a significant day, International Holocaust Memorial Day, which of course is a day of testimony and a day to honor the courage of those who bear witness. But it's also an opportunity to recognize the importance of historical and personal memory in as a power for change for the good. And particularly this subject, child refugees then and now, seems to address, to me, it seems to address something of the defensively neurotic obsession we have developed with knowing where people are from. Where are you from? I think for many people in the world at the moment is a threatening question. And I'm minded to quote Saint-Exupéry, who asked himself, where am I from? And his answer was, I'm from the place called childhood. And that's something I think we all have in common. And I'd like, therefore, to start by asking Alf Dubs of his childhood experience as a passenger on the Kindertransport that brought him from Czechoslovakia to London. And Alf, I know that you're hesitant about having been on the Kindertransport being a sort of distinction or qualification for talking about fundamental humanitarian values. But I'd be very grateful if you could tell us what that experience was like, and what that experience was like when you reflect on it later in life and understand that train journey was what saved your life.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me to take part in this. It's an honor and a privilege. Just a word about my background, as you asked me. When I was 6 years old, my father, who's Jewish, left Prague the day the Nazis occupied in March 1939. My mother was refused permission to leave, and she got me on a kinder transport. Obviously, I have some memories before leaving, having to tear a picture of the Czech president, Beneš, out of my school book and stick in a picture of Hitler and things like that. And I can still see in my mind's eye my mother anxiously at the waiting for the train to leave. A lot of anxious parents who never knew whether they'd see their parents again. German soldiers with swastikas as a background. And then a 2-day journey, interminably long on hard wooden seats, although as a 6-year-old one doesn't mind that, till I got to Liverpool Street Station. So that was a journey, and there were 10,000 Kindertransport children who were accepted by the United Kingdom in 1938-39 on the Kindertransport from Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia, mainly from those countries. And at that time, although there were some arguments in the House of Commons, which I've read since, there wasn't that much of an argument about children coming, except that, as I learned subsequently, no other European country took any of the children. It was just the UK. And beyond that, maybe Sweden took 1 or 2, but mainly the UK. And even the Americans said they can't do it, it's additional to quota. So that was the background. And clearly things have changed a great deal since then. Can I go fast forward to my going into politics? And
Please do,
just one little story. I had to go at Parliament before I was elected in another constituency, which I wasn't going to win in the British system. And I was in the cities of London and Westminster, which is central London. This was the 1970 general election. My Conservative opponent, who won, was Christopher Tugendhat. So we had the spectacle of a refugee from Vienna competing with a refugee from Prague for the central constituency in this country. And the media never picked that story up, which I thought was interesting. And eventually I got to Parliament. Then I lost. Shall I go fast forward, or shall I wait for small questions?
No, please. I'm fascinated by that, because it's what it says is that, you know, we have a burnished and cherished memory of humanitarian help and of proof, if you like, of the opportunity that refugees can bring to a country rather than being a burden. But the contribution is made.
Well, I was actually quite surprised at the opportunities I got. I never thought I'd make it, but I got into the House of Commons, and I found myself on a committee, a small committee of members of Parliament, dealing with the law changing the future of British nationality. And there was I, a naturalized Brit, actually determining the legislation which would be the base of British nationality, well, until today, basically. So I thought, what an amazing opportunity this country has given me. But would that it was still the case. So I'm going to fast forward to when an immigration bill was going through the House of Lords. And at that time, we learned that there were 95,000 unaccompanied child refugees somewhere in Europe, mainly in France, Greece, and Italy. And I put down an amendment, which after some went back, it went to Commons, was slightly defeated, went back to Lords, bigger majority. And then something amazing happened. The Home Secretary, who was Theresa May at the time, summoned me in to say the government proposed to accept the amendment. And what happened was something quite dramatic. In the course of the legislation going from the Commons, from the Lords where it was passed, to the Commons where it was turned down, back to the Commons, back to the Lords, and then my seeing Theresa May, public opinion had woken up to this in Britain. It was absolutely amazing. One could feel it. I think it was partly the terrible pictures of people drowning in the Mediterranean, the Syrian boy Alan Kurdi found drowned on the Mediterranean beach. And British public opinion woke up to this. It was quite dramatic. And I got shouted at in the street. Normally when they shout at politicians, it's abuse. But no, it was keep going with the amendment. And even some government ministers came up to me and said, keep going with the amendment. So that was a victory of sorts.
I think, because when you mentioned Theresa May, but wasn't it Theresa May who asked for a personal meeting with you and tried to get you to withdraw the amendment on the basis that if you let these children in, others would follow?
Exactly so. And I said, I just can't do that. I said, we cannot leave children in the jungle in Calais, as it then was, or on the Greek islands. We cannot leave people vulnerable to criminality, to trafficking, to prostitution. Can't do it. So I said to her, I'm sorry, this won't wash. So then eventually she was forced to ask me to see her again. and she decided to accept the amendment because by then public opinion was on the case, and public opinion was actually saying to government supporters, and we tried to make this all party, although mainly government supporters were the ones we had to work on. Public opinion was saying to government supporters, you've got to back this amendment. And the government, second time around, when it went back from the Lords to the Commons, the government would have lost in the Commons, I'm pretty sure. And therefore, what happened was that the government decided to concede, and they accepted the amendment. But they accepted it eventually in a rather niggardly way. So it wasn't a massive victory as I'd hoped it was.
It was, I mean, the headline initially had been that 3,000 children, unaccompanied refugee children, would be allowed into this country. And you had to support, as you say, of public opinion, but also of local councils who were happy to organize facilities for them to be looked after. What is the total number in the end under the Dubs Amendment of these children who were able to come into the UK?
Well, there you are. There's a sad story. 480. There's another scheme under which they came when they had families here, but those who had no families here, 480. And the reason the government put an arbitrary limit on it was because the government said there are not enough local authorities who can provide foster families who take the children, which we've been able to disprove handsomely by getting a large number of local authorities to make commitments. But that's the government's position, and they've stuck with it. Now,
we've had bad news, haven't we, in the last couple of days from the Home Office?
Yes, there was an answer to a parliamentary question in the Commons where the immigration minister said they're going to close the scheme down altogether. Previously, they'd simply said, we can't find local authorities. Now they just said, we're going to close it down altogether. So I think that's very disappointing and shabby, although I have to say not totally surprising.
This is part, isn't it, of the Brexit withdrawal agreement and the deletion of your amendment. It must be bitterly disappointing for you and those who worked with you.
Can I just say, it's slightly more complicated than that, if I may, because there's a second scheme, which was an EU treaty, the Dublin Treaty, under which a child in one EU country, a refugee child, can apply to join family in another. So a Syrian boy in Italy could, for example, apply to join an uncle in England. And we tried to get an amendment through which would maintain that principle even after Britain left the EU. A big mistake, but that's not what we're talking about today. And initially it was passed in Parliament, then the government rescinded it in further legislation, and now they're still trying to back off that very much indeed. And we've argued that there are probably more children in that category in northern France, or on the Greek islands in particular, who've got family here. And how can a government possibly say no to family reunion when it's the most basic right for children to join members of their family?
Can I go now to Brando and ask you, on the back of what Alpha's been saying, we have had in September last year, so very recently, a new EU proposal called a new pact on migration and asylum, which to someone like me looks like a fresh start. It looks like an encouraging signal that that the European Union is trying to create an asylum approach that would ensure human dignity and solidarity. Should we be optimistic now that there might be some political way out of this chaos and out of the misery and the human rights violations, or not? Are there caveats?
Thank you for inviting me to contribute to this discussion. I have to be very frank. I think that we are still not there, not enough to the extent needed, also in the proposal. So the European Parliament will for sure propose to ameliorate it, because it's still too focused on relocating, on sharing the burden of how to send people away, or in some cases how to relocate inside, but never inside the EU, but never with really mandatory mechanisms. And it's still not enough about how to have a shared responsibility towards these people. And I have to say that this weekend, in fact, this weekend I will go with other colleagues to visit the border between Croatia and Bosnia, where we have the Lipa camps, where we have people that are treated in inhuman way, also by the European countries today. And this is a responsibility, not just of Croatia, but also of the other bordering countries, including mine, including Italy. So we have today a situation of despair and of impossibility to just solve the situation with putting some money. We need instruments, we need systems. I've been working already in the past mandate in the European Parliament on proposals to strengthen the actions, especially towards children refugees. The mandatory presence of a guardian for them in hotspots, the renewal of all the forbiddals to detain children, and we still have seen a patchy application of these principles. Today, so we can be optimistic with the fact that the debate has reopened. There is a proposal. Finally, we are out of the silence on these issues. But the parliament will fight for making it better. We have been able already to ameliorate previous proposals on many topics. But I have to say that when we look at migration, we have been weak. We have been weak in terms of finding solutions together. On children that we have been focusing on, I have to say that the parliament has been a strong advocate for children's rights, both for the refugee children, but also for children in general. So I can see a pattern of a continuing effort. In this sense, I'm myself working today on measures against child poverty, for fighting child poverty, not just for refugee children, but also for them. We know many of them are in poverty, even though they are refugee children. Let me say just this final reflection on this. I mean, today it's Holocaust Remembrance Day. We had 1 year ago a very strong testimony of a child of the time, of Liliana Segre, presently senator in Italy, senator for life. It's like a life, it's similar to the life peerages that are there in UK. She has been nominated by the President of the Republic for her enduring work, especially with children, with students, to learn about when she was a child. And she was, she tried to find asylum in Switzerland, but she couldn't find. And in the end, she was brought to Terezin. She was in a concentration camp. And she's been a powerful testimony, I think, for all the parliament. And I think we should remember her story, also a story as a failed refugee, unable to be recognized as a refugee, that tells us a lot about the tragedies of the past, but also of today.
Brando, I know that you're very involved in questions of social inclusion, and I wonder, on the back of what you've just said, that how much more difficult this can be if the longer refugees are exposed to traumatic situations. And when you think of children, some of whom have spent, you know, their earliest years in appalling situations, one thinks of the kind of human warehouses in which we store people on our external borders, or indeed also within our own borders. The idea of people being kept with less dignity than we would confer to a wheel of cheese under current health and safety laws. I just feel, you know, when you talk about children, when we talk about children, the urgency of it. And going back again to what Alf was saying, I mean, we have 0.1% refugees in terms of general population in the UK. Can we not start with the children? And is there any project that you're aware of, Brando, that might accelerate at least that bit, the bit of the children who aren't reunited with their families yet, or have no family, or the ones where that seem to be just disappearing. I mean, we think there's 100,000, but we think that 10,000 might have just simply disappeared into what? Sex trafficking, slavery. Where is the urgency?
So let's be very concrete and clear on this, very pragmatic. The data show us that children are the easiest to integrate in countries where they come. So they are an enrichment for the country that welcomes them. Data show us that. Other kinds of generations of refugees are more difficult for various reasons, but children are like a blank page. And so it's easier for them to become very active and contributing members of the society they are brought to. But obviously, as you very well underlined, if you are contributing to the shocks, to the traumas they've in many cases already experienced to get to your country, to Europe, to any of the member states, and then you are undermining this potential, which I try to describe in an objective way. Then we have the humanitarian concerns, we have our values, but also, as I said, it's a matter of conveniency, of interest for the countries of reception to invest in children immediately and not let them suffer more. So this should be also an argument to use towards those who are maybe less sensitive, but should be aware that we are doing a very wrong thing from all points of view. And so I have to say that today there are many projects. Luckily, I've been working myself on some of them also very specifically to support integration and to contrast abuses of children, especially the phenomenon of the disappearances that we know about. I have to say, I know projects happening in my country, in Italy, financed through the European funds. That's also why, I mean, let me express my own opinion on this, very personal. That's why I'm sad that also that UK has left our bloc, because we will have less opportunity to do these projects together. But I'm convinced that still, whatever is the being member or not of the European Union, it's very important that also we cooperate to find the best ways, the best practices, the ways to give these children future, build projects that are able to also show communities that it's an investment for the future of everyone. And I'm convinced, I'm optimistic that we can deliver on that, because when we do that, we have a positive reaction from the local population, and also we are giving hope and future to children, which is, I think, a duty for us as institutions.
And as you've been saying, and Alf was saying, if public opinion can be carried, along with this, then there really is hope for a change and a solution. And which takes me very nicely into Stephen Daldry, who's coming to us from New York City. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, for waiting, because in a sense it all culminates what we're talking about today with this whole question of public opinion and how refugees, particularly child refugees, are seen. It's about perceptions, and all too often, I think the refugee problem is described in a kind of universal categories, and we have words of clumps and crowds and hordes and swarms and caravans, but not of the individual. And you, being no slouch in knowing how to get public opinion at people's attention, you have devised or been part of this extraordinary child refugee journey which is about to start. You're going to tell us more about it, but it's a child with a difference, if you like. And I don't know, Stephen, if you want to introduce this a little bit, or I know that we've got a clip, if you're happy to run with that, what would you like to start with?
Sorry about that. Hi, Francis. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm the chairman of a theatre company called the Good Chance Theatre Company, which is a registered charity in the United Kingdom and in France, and actually also in the United States. The Good Chance Theatre started in the Calais refugee and migrant camp during the Great Migration Crisis of 2015. And it started with a couple of young British playwrights who built, outrageously perhaps, a theatre in a refugee camp. And perhaps that's the subject of this conversation. What on earth would you be doing building a theatre in a refugee camp? I have a small clip just to give you the genesis of the company and the genesis of the project, and then we'll get on talking about Young Amal and this walk we're doing with Young Amal. But here's a little clip just to explain the genesis of the company. Let's. That gives you a little journey where we've been to get to a point where we're taking young Amal. Little Amal is a 9-year-old girl. She's from Aleppo, and she was actually a character in the play The Jungle, this play we did in London and in New York. We're in the process of rehearsing that play to tour across the United States in preparation for the election here, particularly to swing states when unfortunately the pandemic struck and rehearsals and that tour was interrupted. But what we have planned this year is this character from the play, Young Amal. She's a young girl, but she's also an unusual young girl, as Francis said, because she's actually a puppet. She's a 3.5-meter puppet. And she'll be walking from the Turkish-Syrian border, just about 2.5 hours from Aleppo, and she'll be walking in real time across Turkey and across the Aegean to across Greece, right the way through Italy. She'll go into France, Germany, Brussels, back to France, across the Channel, and she'll walk through the United Kingdom, through Canterbury, up to the United Kingdom, ending at the Manchester International Festival of Theatre in the autumn of this year. It is, in a sense, a festival, a mobile traveling festival, or a festival, if you like, of hope. The simple question we've been asking for the last 2 years to a variety of different groups along the route is a simple one, which is, how would you like to welcome this unaccompanied minor? She's unaccompanied and she's looking for her mother. In a way, she will find some version of her mother in Manchester, but what she's looking for is her family. The question is, how would you like to welcome her? And we've been asking this question to civic groups, to churches, to mosques, to Christian churches, to civic institutions, schools, and indeed to cultural organizations. And over the last 18 to 2 years, we have orchestrated this Festival of Theatre with all interested parties along the route. And the celebrations that will be welcoming her, and again, she walks as a puppet in real time. So it's many months of this walk. It's not meant to be a march, I hasten to add. It is a traveling festival where she is welcomed, and she's welcomed in small villages, small towns, as well as in large cities. For example, like Athens, where in conjunction with Athens Festival, we have this huge project where she is trying to find her way through the city. I'll give you one example of this. And actually she tries, what the puppet does is she creates, if you like, a labyrinth. She's following yarn, as she's trying to find her way through the city, and the city eventually becomes embedded in this huge yarn as she's trying to find. She actually meets a Minotaur in that particular city. We have other large events. She will be leading meeting, as I say, civic leaders. So she will get to the Vatican and meet the cardinals there, maybe the Pope, and she'll meet obviously religious leaders in Canterbury. But she'll also have a birthday party at some point along the route in London, and we'll be asking people to come and welcome her. The response we're getting, we have been getting, again, from groups along the route, again, this has been working on this for a couple of years now, has been extraordinarily positive. The interesting thing is that it's different for different people. Obviously, what they're going to respond to is depends on how that particular community group, civic organization or orchestra wishes to respond to an unaccompanied minor walking through their locale, their town, or their city. We are doing this for a number of reasons. It builds on the work we were doing in Calais and the work we've been doing in London and in the northern cities of Sheffield and Coventry. But it's trying to, yes, in one sense, it's trying to humanize the story, of course, and it's trying to find connections, but it's also along the route. It's finding refugee groups that are already in those societies, that are already, and when I say refugee groups, what I mean is recent arrivals, but also arrivals who might have come generations before. And it's as much the generations before that's as exciting as the recent arrivals who wish to find a way in which they can celebrate their own cultures or the culture that's now emerged in their host country, to actually find a way of a communication. And that's really been at the heart of what Good Chance has been trying to do, is find means of which you can communicate between host communities and the communities of refugees, particularly children who come into those towns and cities.
What's remarkable about this, Stephen, if I can just briefly interrupt so that people understand it, is that this walk, this journey, this odyssey that little Amal is going to take involves a huge degree of international and multicultural, if that isn't too denigrated a term, collaboration and enterprise across an entire continent. And I'm just sort of astonished at how you've managed in terms of practicalities to do this. I mean, presumably she's going to be crossing borders, and she with people from all over the world. I mean, who's sorting out the visas? I would be very, very reluctant to take that role in this.
There are many, many practical challenges. Obviously, it is an odyssey, and the challenge is part of the challenge is part of the difficulty, if you like, and it's mirroring a difficulty that many children have made on this journey. Our journey is we're just going on the same journey that many thousands of children have made in the past. So she's walking in the steps of other children, and obviously, if she meets hardship, we're not expecting that. Obviously we'll plan for it, but the idea is that we're looking for welcome, and we're trying to bring out the positive and the best of the response, rather than working towards what might be the challenges of that response. But yes, we have very good international partners in the International Rescue Committee with the United Nations, and with other significant organizations, including Comic Relief and other organizations, Help Refugees, who have been working with us to establish these relationships, as well as the practical challenges of taking this puppet. And the puppet itself is created by the Handspring Puppet Company in South Africa. And some of those images you saw there were from South Africa on a prototype when we were testing her just under Table Mountain there. So we've been walking in South Africa, we've been walking on Hampstead Heath, we've been practicing with her, with our teams of refugee puppeteers who will be taking her on this route. And you might know Handspring because they created that very famously, they created War Horse out of the National Theatre some years ago. So they've been working with us very closely as well. The greatest thing is creating empathy, and that's perhaps the most powerful thing that we can do right now, is actually allow people to create. We found an extraordinary empathy with people finding when seeing and interacting with young Amal.
What's so exciting about it is her visibility. I mean, just the scale, 3.5 meters high, but also the idea that she has a narrative of her own, which will develop along the journey in the context in which she finds herself at any given time. So this interaction, and also the fact, I remember Alf Dubs, you said at some point that English was your third language. You know, Amal can't speak, but she can express herself. She has no language but all languages, which is the language of gesture and of art, if you like. I mean, she's able to contain and express imaginative scenarios, which I guess are all slightly left to chance, even though you don't know quite how she's going to be by the time she gets to Manchester. Presumably, part of the reaction to her is how that will be determined.
That's correct. I mean, when we've obviously we've been taking her out in different communities to see the response and test the response. One of the things that I found most moving is that when children, other young people react to her, and little Amal obviously doesn't speak because that will cause its own challenges. What language? Well, no, I mean, how would she speak? But when children do interact with her, they can usually tell you the story that she's been on. They'll be different, but they will create a narrative for Amal themselves. They'll create an imaginative response to where she's been. You can tell her the very, very briefest amount of information, and they'll create a narrative that makes sense for themselves.
There's a question that's come up from someone who's watching tonight saying, you know, how will Amal's journey be adapted to COVID conditions? I mean, that must have been, I think you've already had to delay her departure, haven't you?
We were going to start rehearsals in a couple of weeks. We've obviously had to delay this because of the pandemic. And a lot of it will depend on the vaccine rollout for obvious reasons. And we're monitoring constantly. We're very aware of the challenges that we're going to get, both in terms of the borders and in terms of keeping our team safe and the people that come to meet her safe. She is outdoors, which is a huge advantage. She stays outdoors. But how they survive, I mean, we're keeping on our plans at the moment, and all the plans are going ahead, and we're feeling very good about all the plans. So all our thousands now of different partners along the route. So that may change, but that's where we're at the moment.
Brando, can I come back to you on the question of coronavirus and the situation of refugees, and most especially in this context, children in detention centres or in camps, official or unofficial. What is happening to help protect them from the pandemic?
This for sure is a very sensitive issue, a very important issue, and for sure we are not seeing enough being done for this, because we have seen a lot of situations where the right to their own health, and also against any reasonable action to defend also everyone else from the risk of contagion, has been put in place. In fact, we have seen a lack of organization in this sense in many European countries. We have been advocating on this from the European Parliament with more than one parliamentary question, and with the debate on that in the European Parliament. Unfortunately, we cannot act directly on this topic. We have grown stronger on many issues, and in fact, with the European budget, we can support important projects for the integration of which I was talking earlier. But on this, we need to see a real commitment from the member states. And in fact, what we can do is to try to raise the awareness and make the public opinions think about it. Again, because it's in their own interest that we are facing the health risks for people that are living in refugee camps or in hotspots, because we are all together in fighting this virus. We know that there is no difference of condition for people to be able to, unfortunately, to be
Exposed,
hit by the virus. So I mean, this is something that we need to keep at the center of the debate. Sometimes I see that forgot, but when we discuss about this, but also for these people, for them, the pandemic is a reality.
If we go back to Amal, and obviously you'll do everything you can for her to be able to negotiate the COVID kind of conditions for the health and safety, obviously, of the people who are organizing these events and the festival around her journey. But I just have to ask you, I mean, maybe I should ask Alf this at this point. If I understand it right, technically now, Amal, an unaccompanied minor, cannot, how's she going to come into England, into the UK? She's, I mean, the door's shut, right? How is Amal legally going to enter the country? It's going to happen because she's a puppet, but if she was a real person?
Well, it's quite complicated because the government will say they do have some very limited powers under the immigration rules to let people come in extra to any legislation. The fact is, there is no proper legislation in place. Therefore, we can't enforce her rights. And if we can't enforce her rights, the government can do what it likes. So any unaccompanied child is in a very weak position unless we can get the law changed.
You've got a problem there in a way, Stephen, haven't you? Which is that, you know, art doesn't necessarily mimic life in this case. I mean, wouldn't it be sort of, in a way, it's weirdly, ironically, a sort of symbolically at least, would it not be more powerful if we find that Amal can't cross these borders?
Well, first of all, Brando is right that the situation in the camps is with COVID is appalling. It's appalling. However bad we think it is for ourselves in lockdown or in certain geographic areas of the country, however bad we think it is for us, it's worse for the refugees. It's just worse. Even if you take the news today, from even in the United Kingdom, we're not talking about the terrible camps that exist in other places, but just the situation in Folkestone that came out today with the coronavirus outbreak in Folkestone at this asylum centre that's been built by the government in Folkestone. So even in our own borders, we can't control. In appalling conditions in Folkestone, we can't even control the coronavirus outbreak in Folkestone, let alone anywhere else in the world. So it's important to remember, and I'm going to repeat myself, but it's important to remember that however bad it is for us, it's going to be worse for the refugees. In a sense, for little Amal, yes, for the people, for the refugee, I mean, to be honest, we don't know the problems and the challenges that might come with the closed borders as the team of refugees who are animating little Amal, how the borders will close. We are still pursuing this as if we can cross over those borders, but you're right. We are still an art project. This is a project to inspire, to bring hope, and to encourage and to celebrate the gift, as Brando said. I think it's that what we have to understand is that not seeing refugees, and particularly refugee children, as a burden or as victims, but also as a gift to our societies, and is trying to understand that gift of when they arrive and to find a way of welcoming them. But yes, we are an art project, and again, for the reality will be for children, it'll be much harder.
I feel very optimistic from what I've seen of all the work that's been and thought that's been put into the journey of Amal, that her very scale will encourage a bigger welcome and sort of enlarge our own ideas and feelings about what it is to be a child refugee. On that note, we've got a question here from Carol Vincent, who says, how can we let our authorities know that we can take a migrant child whilst family or permanent carers are found? Now, I mean, I've often heard people asking this question. Alf, could you answer that for the UK?
Well, if anybody is going to foster a child, which is what we want, then what we have to do is to make sure, and the local authority will want to make sure, that the foster family passes all the tests. Now, it's a bit cumbersome, it's a bit bureaucratic, but we've got to do it to protect the children. We can't just say anybody can take refugee children when we don't allow that for any other children. So people have to let themselves be known to local authorities if they wish to be considered for fostering. If they're already foster parents, then that's fine, they can do it immediately. But they should contact their local authority, which I think is the best way. And quite a few local authorities are sympathetic to this. But of course, if the government say no more can come, that puts a block on it. However, there are, of course, in a year, about 5,000 children make their way across the channel illegally, either in these dangerous rubber dinghies on the back of lorries. And they arrive in Kent, or some of them arrive in Croydon. And the government are very anxious that they should be relocated from Kent to other parts of the country as well, which is a positive thing. So that's good. But of course, we want there to be legal ways to safety, not for children to have to use illegal paths, which are dangerous, and they get killed or they get drowned on the journey. So it is a legal path to safety which we're after. But that's the situation as it is at the moment.
There was famously after the Second World War, wasn't there? There was a period, because of course we had, what, 20 million refugees within Europe, all trying to get back home if their home still existed. And they had the Nansing passport system, which was quite an efficient way of organizing safe corridors and repatriation in that case. But is there nothing that could be done? Have there been any proposals, Alf, I don't know if you know, or maybe Brando, to expedite the crisis amongst children refugees by some sort of passport system that will get them more quickly to people who can help, foster parents or actual parents or local authorities?
Yes, it has been suggested, but of course the real thing is it's political will. If a government says we will take some of these child refugees from Greece or northern France, whatever it is, they could do it. They could do it. They don't need the device of a passport. The passport will be helpful and will be strengthening, but actually it's political will we're short of.
That's where we then devolve. Very, grateful to be able to do it. To projects like Stephen's and all the people that are involved in that, all the other creative people who've given their time and their energy and their ideas to this. I mean, I get the feeling, you're going through 65 cities with Amal. I think there's a possibility for like a huge following to grow alongside her. And I presume you're optimistic, Stephen, or you probably would find it very hard to spend as much time and energy as you are on this project. But can we expect, in Manchester, assuming she arrives, that there's going to be, perhaps, political will can be leveraged on the back of this?
Yes, although I want to be clear that we are an artistic response, not a political response. We are but just can pick up on something Alf said. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of times, whether it was Alf's amendment or Dublin III, the laws are often sometimes in place, but the government, there's a deep, growing lack of will to enact those, to make those laws actually work. For example, Dublin III, getting children to be relocated with their parent, with their members of their family. I think it's, may I say on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, I think it's worthwhile saying that the forces of reaction, the forces of difference, the forces of antagonism towards difference, towards migration, towards refugees are really at force at the moment. I mean, we've seen it. I'm speaking to you from New York, and goodness me, I mean, one of the great things is the number of Holocaust survivors that spoke out at the start of the previous election and just before this one, saying, we have seen this before. We have seen what we're looking at here. That beware of what is happening, that your executive and your government is failing you. Your judiciary are failing you. Your police are failing you. We were saved in the United States by the voters who managed to stop what was happening. But it was the voters, not the institutions of government, that stopped this happening. So I think that we need to be one of the functions of young Amal is to get people on the ground to say, let us celebrate what is happening. Let us celebrate these children. Let us celebrate unaccompanied minors, find ways of communicating, talking, empathizing, sharing, and helping and welcoming, rather than the forces of darkness, which are, if you like, are more present now than they have been for many generations.
Alf, you remember those years after during the war, but after, and of course, Stephen has given us a reminder, a painful reminder, that many of the conditions from the 1930s and 1940s are with us now. Misinformation, disinformation, using terms like asylum seeker as a pejorative, you know, othering of the person who's on the wrong side of the border and you don't want them on your side of the border, great intolerance. And again, sort of talking of people as categories, one size fits all. They're simply sort of what, biological or ideological category errors. What can we do beyond what Stephen is doing with such sort of creative imagination? What can we do to sort of push back on that? It's so contested now, everyone's so angry and divided.
Well, Chris, Stephen says he's an artist. Congratulations. I think it's terrific what you're doing, because it is precisely the way of getting the message over. It's not just politicians, with all due respect to Brandon and me, not just politicians, but we have to spread the word wider, and we have to use other means, and art is a fantastic way. Art and sport are two of the fantastic ways of doing this, because it makes people accept it. It's this criticism of the other. You know, it's this criticism. I mean, I've been, not to make it too personal, but I've had the majority of messages I've had are supportive, but I've had a few people who blame me for trying to bring terrorists into the country, you know, and this sort of stuff. And they're against the other, and it is very shabby. And therefore, when the arts can be mobilized, I think that is absolutely terrific. I repeat, the arts and sport are very powerful weapons if they can be mobilized in order to influence public opinion. Because what happens in public opinion is not on side. We get the extreme right-wing parties taking advantage. And we've seen it in many European countries. The extreme right capitalize, they exploit the refugee situation in order to get votes. We've seen it in Italy, seen it in Germany, Austria, seen it in Hungary, Italy, and so on. And we have to be on our guard. Anything that makes public opinion sympathetic through the arts or sport is positive.
I could thank you very much indeed, After. But yeah, but I do think on our guard is right, particularly if you're looking at what is happening in the European Union. In Hungary, it's a disaster, and we do need. And the disinformation is a disaster. When you have major news networks such as Fox News, absolutely delivering propaganda against the other, extreme right-wing propaganda, it is dangerous. It is a terrible, terrible virus that is as dangerous as anything else.
But as Alf was saying, I mean, we've had it before. I mean, the detaching people from reality and convincing them to believe in an unreality through lies and sort of political burglary, if you like, is incredibly dangerous. And I hope there's going to be moving, even by having conversations like this, towards, you know, some sort of correction to that. But I also, you know, listening to what Alf was saying, I wonder. You know, I know you haven't want to be distinguished in any particular way as having been a refugee on the Kindertransport. I mean, you've been very candid that it's, you know, it's quite useful in galvanizing public opinion, but that you don't want to be defined just as a refugee. But my question to all of you would be, actually, perhaps Alf, you could try this one first, is when does a refugee stop being a refugee?
Well, as soon as he or she feels they're no longer a refugee, and as soon as he or she is allowed to stop feeling as a refugee, you know, to stop being treated as different, to stop being treated as something to be looked at as almost as something odd, and to become normalized. And I think our job in countries to which refugees come is to normalize refugees by enabling them to do all the things that other children of their age do. You know, sport and arts and so on, and the challenge is to make it all as normal as possible, so that they can just fit into the scenery, fit into the landscape, and not be treated as different.
Brando, I mean, you must, with your concentration on an experience in social inclusion, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that in general we should really change the narrative. We should bring more the reality into many abstract discussions that we hear about refugees, about children. I'm convinced that if people see the things, they are made able to understand concretely what we are talking about. They can be inspired to be more humane and more caring, thinking of, especially today again, of the horrors that our history has given us, as today as I mean, a warning of where we can go if we forget our humanity. So I'm convinced that we need to do our part, all of us, citizens, civil society, artists, but also the institutions must lead by example in this sense.
Yeah.
Stephen, do you want to add anything to that?
I would only just say, out of interest, 40% of the city of New York City were not born in the United States. 40% of the population of the city were born here. It's a city of refugees, and it's a city of migrants. It's also a city of the United States. It's a city of America. I think that one of the great things we can do is to create narrative, and it's certainly something I'm very keen with Good Chance Theatre. And for many refugees, they're living a life of suspension. It's a suspended reality. The past is gone. There is no future, and the present is some suspended camp or intermediate, non-legal. So they have no story. One of the great things to do is to reconnect them with a narrative. In other words, to acknowledge where they've been, to make where the present is better, and allow the future to be something real. So you create a narrative of their lives, which actually allows them to start flourishing. But you flourish with narrative. Living in suspension is no good for anybody.
Absolutely, Steve. I
We
agree.
are the stories we tell ourselves, and you know, as Nabokov said, you know, speak memory. And I suppose,
Right, can I call you back, please, or could you call me in about 10 minutes?
Speak memory, but tell us things that won't destroy us. And so I feel much more optimistic from having had this sort of, you know, broad conversation from so different, you know, places and backgrounds. It's also the case, I'm sure, that if you know, walk onto a street in any major city in Europe, scratch something, you'll find they're from somewhere else. We're all from somewhere else, really, you know, if you want to go back far enough. But I can't. Brando, I think, has just had to leave, and I'm being told to sort of round up now. It leaves really me just the very pleasant job of saying thank you very, very much, Brando from Brussels, Stephen, New York City, Alf from London. I'm really, really pleased to have met you virtually. I hope we can perhaps work together and join together in a non-virtual context, maybe around Amal. Maybe we'll all meet in Manchester. That would be good.
That'd be fantastic.
I can't thank you enough for watching this today, for being here at this event. And I'm commanded to say, please see the comments section on YouTube and Facebook for links to further information, and you'll find stuff there that I've seen some of it really fascinating. So I thank you all for contributing.
Thank you.
The people
Thank you. Thank you very much, and delighted to have met you, Stephen.
Very lovely to see you, Alf. I'll see you very soon. It's great to see you. And thanks, Francis.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Francis. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Francis.
Thank you.
You did it brilliantly.